Today we're talking skateboard decks and how we got to some of the modern shapes and materials. We're talking the early days, the 80s skateboard explosion, crazy shapes, even crazier graphics, and the flood of modern brands. So buckle up, little boys. This one's gonna be a good one. If you guys like these videos, so make sure you like, subscribe, and comment. Chapter 1, the early days. The early days of skateboarding is fuzzy to say the least. And you can read books and magazines and they all have different opinions on when skateboarding started. Some of the early renditions, like the knee coaster, date all the way back to the 1920s. And the scooter skate in the 1930s. Although these things resemble skateboards, they never really caught on like skateboarding. So we would say people didn't really start skating until the 40s. And it was invented by surfers to have something to ride when the waves were bad. In the 40s, most of the boards were homemade units. So they basically would take a plank of wood, they would shape it kind of like a surfboard, and then take the bottom of roller skates or with metal wheels and just drill it into the bottom.
Oh, gnarly!
And it wasn't until 1956 that this brand called Humco became the first brand to manufacture and sell skateboards commercially. And a few years later, roller derby is founded by Barry Jacobs. Now moving into the 60s, skateboards were just a toy that were used around the playground. But it was also exploding as a fad. And in 1962, Val Surf becomes the first surf shop to sell skateboards. Makaha Skateboards said they were selling 10,000 skateboards a day at this point. And then in 1965, we see Patty McGee make an appearance on the cover of Life magazine. Skateboards at this time are still rather primitive, but they take a huge leap forwards in 1969, when Larry Stevenson of Makaha invents the very first ever kicktail. At this time, the only way to make a kicktail was out of plastic, hence the name banana board. And then on the wooden boards, they still didn't have the technology to make a kicktail out of wood, so they would take a wooden wedge block and screw it into the board to give a tail. As chance would have it, in 1972, another gigantic invention would push skateboarding forward. This is the year that we see the world's first ever urethane wheel.
And there was much rejoicing.
It's borrowed from the roller skate and it's a product of the Cold War. If you want to know more about the history of the skateboard wheel, check out the link below. We made a whole video about it. In the 70s, skateboards were made of all sorts of interesting materials, like plastic, fiberglass, and even aluminum, and even aluminium. And even aluminium, bro. Oh my God. We see brands pop up like Bond Skateboards, Zephyr, Z-Flex. In 1976, George Powell starts making boards called the Quicksilver, and he's marketing them through Sims. Also in 1976, there's a breakthrough that changes skateboarding forever. A Canadian woodworker named Wee Willie Winkle. From Ontario, Canada, he's a skier in the winter and a skateboarder in the summer, and he's a cabinet maker and carpenter by trade. This guy takes inspiration from the famous Eames chair. It's designed by a couple, Charles and Ray Eames, and their chair is one of the most famous contributions to modern architecture and furniture design. The chair uses multiple layers of thin wood glued and pressed together to give it its shape. With this technique, Mr. Winkle himself makes the first wooden kicktails. And to boot, the boards are also incredibly thin and strong. This leaves plastic, fiberglass, and aluminium skateboards in the dust. And thanks to Winky, this is the modern skateboard technology that we still use today. With the droughts in California at this time, paired with huge updates in technology around skateboarding equipment, this creates an explosion in the level of skateboarding that we've seen. In the late 70s, we see boards starting to get wider, and they're the first to put graphics on the bottom of the boards. Some of these boards include the Dogtown Bigfoot, GNS Flying Aces, Santa Cruz Steve Olson Checkerboard, the Z Product Z-Pig, the Sims Superply, and even the Sims Lonnie Toff Double Wheeler. It's a double wide board with two sets of trucks. In 1978, we get Pal Peralta starting and Skullskate. And we get the first boards ever made with concave. We're on to chapter 2, the 80s explosion. The 80s is defined by pro models, pro shapes, and crazy graphics. An explosion of skateboarding and an explosion of progression. In 1982, a bunch of people that you've probably never heard of went pro. Christian Hosoi, Tony Hawk, Lance Mountain, and Mark the Tater Rogowski. Interesting enough, the original Tony Hawk Pro model that came out in 1982 did so poorly in Canada. He wasn't quite yet dominating the contest circuit like he would go on to, and the Hawk graphic wasn't exactly sought after at this point. He said in his biography that year he got a royalty check for a whopping 85 cents. But it also makes it one of the most rare boards to find as a collector because no one bought them to keep. Some people made fake reissues of these at one point, and they got dubbed the Phony Hawks. A year later, his graphic would get replaced by the iconic chicken skull that was drawn by VCJ. And even later on, he would get the Hawk Claw. The 80s was also a time that a lot of the pros graphics would evolve, like the Santa Cruz Roscop, the John Lucero Jester, the Grab Key Exploding Clock. Also in the mid-80s, we see the Bones Brigade video show, which is one of the first skateboard videos, and it changed marketing and skateboarding forever. And then in the background, there's this new fad, and it's called street skating, but no one believes that it's gonna catch on. At the same time, we see the first Gons and Nodus Pro models, and the release of the Hosoi Hammerhead. The original Hammerheads were released through Skull Skates, and the shape was designed by Christian Hosoi himself, and the graphic by his father, Ivan. These were the best-selling skateboard model in the world at this point, and they were so insanely popular that there was bootleg versions of this board showing up all over the place. The success of this crazy shaped board spawned tons of crazy shaped boards in the late 80s. Stuff like the Schmidt Stick Ripsaw and Chainsaw, the Sims Lamar Beamer, Sims Slight Buzz, the Skull Skates Mutant, Tracker GSD, Tracker Dan Wilkes, Vision Psycho Stick, Sims Pharaoh, the Zorlak Devilfish, the Misfits Coffin Board, and the Walker Scorpion Sidecut. And in July 1989, we see an ad for the Double Vision, which is essentially Vision taking a board and putting two tails on it. It has a bit of an hourglass shape to it, and I don't even think Vision knew, but it was the first step towards the modern skateboard. This board was shaped by a guy named Chuck Holtz, and this is the moment that changed everything.
And there was much rejoicing.
The crazy thing is that it's rumored that Steve Rocco went and bought out, or maybe even stole, the mold for this board from PS Sticks. With this new mold, Rodney Mullen takes one of the boards made and he routers it less like an hourglass shape, but still with a double tail. And this becomes the second step towards the modern day Popsicle. The board he created was the Mike V Barnyard board on World Industries. People call this the most critical skateboard design in all of skateboard history. To finish off the decade, we see brands start like Lucero Skates, which give pro models to Jeff Grosso and Lucero. We see Blind start, and we see H Street drop pro models for Matt Hensley and Danny Way. And GNS drops pro models for Chris Miller and Neil Blender. At the end of the 80s, we see World Industries drop a lot of crazy boards, and this is foreshadowing for the boards to come heading into the 90s. The introduction to the 90s can be summed up by the reign of terror of skateboard graphics. Most of these graphics created by two men, Sean Cliver and Mark McKee. In 1991, Blind Skateboards releases Video Days, possibly the most iconic skateboard video ever made. Mark Gonzalez changes what is possible on a skateboard, and this is where we see street skating absolutely take over vert skating. Something that Steve Rocco bet big on, and he wins big on. Steve Rocco was basically pushing and pushing to see what he could get away with, and the graphics went insane. We had boards like the Censorship Deck, the Napping Board, the Nodus Worship Board, and even the Blind Mr. Butts board. This board had a graphic with a friendly cigarette on it saying, "Hey kids, I'm Mr. Butts." And the board in the plastic wrap had a single cigarette and a single match, and the board was being sold to kids. We also see an explosion of cease and desist boards, where the brands are ripping off all your favorite movie and TV characters, and Steve Rocco said they actually had a wall of cease and desist letters at World. With these winds of change and the usher in of street skating, we also saw an explosion of small brands come up. Black Label, Alien Workshop, New Deal in 1990, Real Skateboards, Plan B, The Firm, Milk Skateboards, 101, all in 1991. And this was followed by Stereo, Consolidated, Planet Earth, Birdhouse, and Underworld Element, all in 1992. And then in the coming years, brands like Girl, Toy Machine, Chocolate, Creature, Flip, and Antihero. This was all by 1995. Like in the 80s when vert skating exploded, in the 1990s street skating did the same. And as the style of skateboarding changed, obviously the shape of the boards had to change as well. And at this time, the young adolescents of street skating were seeing a lot of really technical ledge skating, which means a lot of the boards got really skinny. They were skinny popsicle boards because the popsicle was here to stay. As we see skateboarding get bigger and gnarlier in the late 90s into the 2000s, we also see it become more mainstream. We see stuff like X Games that puts skateboarding inside the living room of every single house in America on TV. We see Tony Hawk Pro Skater, the video game that starts in 1999, and they release a new version every year until 2007. Not much changes with the popsicle shape at this time, but we see them get slightly wider. I'm a size 12 foot. I used to skate a 7.5 in the late 90s. Now I skate an 8.5. And then as the 2010s hit, technology takes over skateboarding. You get websites like The Barracks and Thrasher that take over the magazine and become king. And we see the technology and creativity generation of skateboard kind of come full circle in the 2010s, where boards were made of fiberglass in the past, and now they're using fiberglass inserts to strengthen and lighten the board. This is stuff like Paul Schmidt designing the P2 board, then Pal Peralta does flight decks. Rodney Mullen designs impact support with Almost. Santa Cruz has their VX decks. Girl has Pop Secret. And even though this may seem like an advancement, it hasn't fully been adopted by the entire industry. There's lots of people that are really weary and they're just buying wood. Also, speaking about full circle, there's been a huge resurgence of shaped boards, but this time with modern concave and kicktails. And love it or hate it, also in the 2010s, a new photo sharing app is invented, and this is called Instagram. Once again, it would change the way that we consume skateboarding. One of the things we will say that's cool about it is that you can use the app to reach anyone in the world through skateboarding. You don't have to live in California in order to be pro. Like, even look at us. We're in some small town in Canada, and we have people that watch the show from all over the world. I mean, when I was in Europe a couple years ago, I had people walking up to me on the street saying, "Hey, I watch your show." Guys, comment below, let us know where you're watching from. And if you see me, I love cheeseburgers, I love Coke Zero, I love donuts, lots of food, just bring it to me. The crazy thing about social media is that no matter where you're at in the world and how much money you have, if you're interesting, if you're cool, you can build a following. It used to be $6,000 to put an ad in a magazine in order to promote your board brand. But then we started to see these small board brands pop up all over the world because they promoted something that was cool on Instagram and then it caught on. I'd say Polar was the first one to do this, and they were the catalyst for an explosion of other small brands. After these guys, there was a ton of other small brands that popped up. We have Palace, Quasi, Weekend, FA, Hockey, GX1000, Alzheimer's, Frog, Passport, Isle, Magenta, Killing Floor, Sci-Fi, Welcome, and more recently, Limousine and Hardbody. This just shows you that anyone who has an idea can start a skateboard brand with the internet and social media. To finish off this chapter, in the year 2020, we see a world pandemic. With that comes an explosion in skateboard sales.
Now watch this drive.
No one was allowed to travel, so everyone went out and they bought skateboards. It made it so that skate shops were running out of wheels and boards. And there were some companies that had over 1 million boards in back order, meaning that skate shops would go to order them and the brand didn't have any boards to supply them. From then, we've seen things kind of cool off. And a lot of shops and brands were left with overstock. And then by this year, we've seen a lot of brands start to take a big hit. We don't want to say it out loud, but it seems like there might be a bunch of board companies that go out of business this year. So always remember to support your local skate shop. Stay out of the malls, go to your local skate shop, the one giving back to the scene. And if you need stuff, buy it there. If you don't have a local shop, it's shredshop.com. Guys, that'll be it. I'm Levi, this is Shred Shop, connecting you to skateboarding, and you just watched the history of the skateboard deck. Stay tuned for Comment of the Week. Oh, we got a spicy one for you, my guys. Comment of the week. It is from a guy, MFND Man. He says, "Not sure if anyone told you, your look is definitely out of style. Bleach hair at your age is wrong. Just be your age." Listen, Bob, who made you the fashion police? If bleaching your hair wasn't cool, then why does Ellen DeGeneres get to do it?